Hey everyone, it's the guy from Wisconsin here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a polish on the internal parts of your P365's trigger assembly. We are going to look at the trigger bar, the striker, the sear, the sear striker block, the striker actuator, and the chassis assembly of the gun itself. This video is not going to cover disassembly of the firearm or reassembly of the firearm. If you need help with that, there are a couple videos out online. The one I would suggest is by Shootwise. His video is very thorough and very helpful. That's the video that I used to disassemble and reassemble my gun. From start to finish, this process took me approximately 3 to 3.5 hours. That includes the full disassembly, the polishing of all of the parts, the cleaning and lubrication of all parts, and then the reassembly of the firearm. This was my first time fully disassembling this gun and putting it back together. So that's just to give you an idea. In terms of difficulty, I would say if you are an expert, if you disassemble firearms all of the time, this is probably going to be on a scale of 1 to 10, a 5 or a 6 for you. There are a few finicky little parts, but nothing too out of the ordinary. If you're an average, mechanically inclined, been around firearms for a long time, you can work on cars or something like that, this is probably going to be a 7 or an 8 for you. Personally, I have a little bit more experience working on some firearms, and I feel comfortable with those sorts of things. For me, this was a 7. If you don't work on firearms, if you're new to firearms or you are not mechanically inclined, this is going to be a 9 or a 10 for you. My suggestion at that point would be just don't do it. It's not really worth it. There is a noticeable difference when everything is said and done. However, I just don't think that if you have the means or the experience to do this, that you're going to be doing yourselves any favor. Out of the box, the 365 has a wonderful trigger. Sig did an excellent job with this, and this is just a slight improvement for those of you that are looking to remove some grittiness, to improve smoothness, to lighten the trigger pull by a small amount, to clean up the reset a little bit. Then this is for you. We're going to go through the in-depth process of what it takes to clean the parts, to polish the parts, and ultimately what the result will be. So we're going to go ahead and jump into it. This is clear. There's no magazine. There's nothing in the chamber. I'm going to show you guys what the finished result looks like up front, because I know that's what you all want to see. So here is the take-up. Take-up is now very smooth. There's no grittiness at all. There's your break. There's your reset. So there you have it, guys. That's what you can expect to achieve. If you want to watch the rest of the video, by all means do. I do show a little bit more in depth about the trigger pull and talk about that a bit more at the end, but I know there's going to be those of you that just want to see the results. So there it is. For those of you that watch the rest of the video, I hope you enjoy it. One last thing before we get started. I'm not a licensed professional. I am not a gunsmith. I do not condone doing these modifications in any way, shape, or form. I don't suggest that you do them. I'm not liable if you do them. This is strictly for educational purposes. Don't do it, guys. This is just me showing you what I've done. So with that being said, let's get started. All Alright, the first component that we're going to be working with is the striker itself. So you can see I have the striker out here, and the main portions of the striker that we're going to be polishing are on the surface. So if you see those wear marks from where there's been contact with the sear, you see one here on this edge, and you also see the couple on the bottom. So those are the main contact points that we're going to be looking to get to a mirror polish. So we're going to take care when polishing to make sure that we're not eroding that surface that's meant to be there. You can see I have two different types of compound. I have one a little more coarse and one that's more fine. So I'm going to start out with the coarse compound here and see if we can get those surfaces nice and shiny. You can see we haven't really made any impact on that hook there on the edge. We're going to do the same now with this surface. Add just a little bit more compound. There's a definite improvement, but this one needs a bit more work. We have to spend a bit more time on that. So here's the end of the first compound polishing. This is with the more the more aggressive compound. It's definitely not mirror finish, but it is a good deal more polished than it was initially. And I think maybe even a little more than is coming off on camera. But I'm going to go ahead and use that finer compound now and polish it up the rest of the way. Here we are after the polishing with the second compound. Not quite a mirror finish, but it's definitely significantly better than it was when we started out. It's quite a deal smoother. There are still some minor imperfections in the surface, but unless you really get aggressive, which I don't want to do because I want to maintain the integrity of not only the geometry, but those flat points there that are important for maintaining the clean break. I think we've achieved what we were looking to do here. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the sear and to the trigger bar surfaces. These are all the components that we're going to be working with and polishing. So you have the chassis itself, and the side of the chassis that we're going to be working with is the side that the trigger bar is resting on, and not the side where the slide release is located. So the main surfaces that we're going to be polishing is this surface here, and also this surface in here. which this component, which I'm not sure the name of this, which sits in here. This is the main surface that the trigger bar is going to be making contact with. Then you have the trigger bar itself, which even with less than 150 rounds through this gun, you can see that there's already some wear from where the trigger bar is making contact with the chassis. And I'm pretty sure if you can hear that, granted there's no lubrication, but the vast majority of grittiness and resistance being felt through the trigger is coming from that surface. So that's what we're going to be working to reduce. Then you also have the striker, which we've already polished. We're also going to be polishing the underside here, which is what I showed you earlier, the point that makes contact with the striker block. You have the sear, which will be polishing this surface here, as well as the raised part. Have the striker block itself, which we'll be polishing the face, and then also the inside, and then the striker bar actuator, the striker block actuator, which will be polishing the top surface that's pushing on the striker block. You can see that wear there. You can see it's not perfectly mirror finish because of this coating that's on there. However, it is quite a bit flatter than the edges that aren't polished. You can noticeably feel a difference. I mean, I can feel quite a bit of rough material on the surface there, whereas here, even though it's not completely polished to the finish, those small holes are being filled by the coating that's on there, but this feels like glass. It doesn't feel nearly as rough as the rest of this, so I don't think the goal is to get it to be perfectly shiny. The goal is to get it to be as smooth as possible, and I think we're achieving that here. I've noticed on some of these MIM'd parts, these injection molded parts, that when you look at the surface, they don't polish out the same way as something that's a milled or machined part, because there's all of these sort of very small pockets and different formations of the way that the metal is being filled, and it just doesn't polish the same as something that's machined and has a single grain running through it where you can get it super shiny and polished. I think in order to do that, you would have to use a stone or something much more aggressive in order to achieve that sort of polish, and I'm just not looking to do that at this point because I want to see how just a simple polish affects the functionality. It's hard to see in the light, but there's a significant difference in the color. This side almost looks completely silver, whereas the back end of it is is, you can definitely see the difference. So this is as far as I'm going to go with this end of the trigger bar. This side I'm leaving completely unpolished because this is the side that's facing the frame. And on this end I have polished essentially up to here. That's the only point that's making contact, and then also polished the top surface here. So those are the main areas that are making contact within the frame. If you see on the back side, I basically polished right up to there. There's no need to polish this other area because it's not exposed. So we're just gonna polish on this side up to about there. And then the interior of this, which is gonna be fun. And then we'll start on the chassis itself. Each time you add you can see there's a significant change. Like I said, each time that you reapply the compound, at this point, this feels like glass. I'm gonna go just a little bit further, see if I can get some of these burrs off the edge here, because I can, if you can hear that, there's kind of burrs all along there. So I don't know if that's catching on anything in the frame, but I'm gonna try to take those down a little bit. It's odd, I don't know if it's part of the machining process or what that is exactly, but kind of strange. You can see those little burrs there on the edge. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call that good. Again, it's not perfectly mirrored, but you see a lot of that coating is filling in those small areas, small detents, and just any imperfections. So feels a lot smoother than it did. I did polish this edge just very briefly because it pretty much just destroyed the buffling. I don't know if those are supposed to be there or not, otherwise I would just file it smooth and try to clean that off, but I'm just not sure, so I'm just gonna leave it how it is. We're gonna start on the chassis now. Okay, you can see the initial first application. So here we are after the second time through. Definitely feels smoother, but I think there's a little bit more we could go on that before we move on to this surface here. And then also taking a look, that jagged part of the trigger bar is actually just riding right underneath where your serial number is. So there's no logical reason why that should be like that, and I don't know how much contact is made there, but I can't see how smoothing that down at all would hurt. Maybe just even polish this surface as well, and then smooth all those little spurs out. Interesting. We're gonna keep working. Okay, so I just finished up polishing the frame, the chassis I should say, and polished in this area here, also on this surface, lower side, a little bit on the underside here, which I'm probably going to do a little more there, and then also the lower section of this piece, and both of these sides pieces where this fits in. So you can definitely tell a difference in the resistance. Put the bar on. Feels quite a bit smoother even without any lubrication. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to knock off some of the burr edges on here and then polish that up a bit. They're still there to some degree, but I don't think that's going to be an issue now. I'm just going to polish that up and make it nice and smooth. I think that's more than sufficient. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so I've completed the polishing of this surface, this surface, this surface, this surface, here and here, and then on the trigger bar, there, here, and the other end. That should be most of the components that have any sort of friction. On the trigger bar assembly. So now we're going to move on to the sear and the striker block. Another surface that's important to note is on the striker block assembly. So you can see that contact point here. When the striker bypasses that, the surface of the striker block there comes in contact with the back of the sear. So we're going to also polish that contact surface on the face of the striker block. We just polish the inside of the barrel on the striker block. And now we're going to polish the top edge that comes in contact with the bottom of the striker. Okay, next we're going to do the top surfaces of the sear. So this surface here, as well as the raised portion there. I'm not going to do very much polishing at all to that lip, just because I want to maintain the integrity of that edge that's there, same as we did on the striker. Here's what we're looking at after the first polish. In contrast, that's the unpolished surface here, and the polished. Here's the finished finish. Came out really nice. Quite a bit smoother. Feels like glass. So now all we have to do is the striker block. I'm going to start with the striker block actuator. So this surface here, where you can see that wear mark, I'm just going to polish just this very edge. There we go. Okay, so at this point we have polished all of our major parts. We have our chassis on both sides, as well as the bottom. We have our trigger bar on both ends. We have the striker block on the top that contacts the striker, as well as the inside of the barrel. This piece here, which I don't know the name of, which sits inside of the chassis. We have our sear. And our striker. Still good engagement on that hook there. You can see that. And then the last piece is this actuator bar for the striker block. So at this point, I'm going to thoroughly clean everything and then thoroughly lubricate everything and then reassemble, and we will test and see the results. So here's what you came to see. Everything's back together. I definitely do think there's an improvement on the action overall, in the smoothness of the trigger take-up, in the cleanness of the brake, and also in the smoothness of the reset. My gun in particular, compared to a couple of the ones that I tested in the store, did seem to have some grittiness to the trigger pull, which all of that is now gone. I'll do my best to show you what we see now. The take-up is very smooth. There's no more crunchiness there. You can see the brake. Here's the reset. Still very positive reset. So there you go. The 365 has a great trigger out of the box. It really is. It's great. When I got everything back together, it took me probably 20 to 50 times of dry firing the gun to decide, is it worth it to do this? Because of how good the trigger is out of the box. And I'm going to go ahead and say it depends on your skill level, how comfortable you feel with disassembling and reassembling the gun, and the access that you have to a polisher, to buffing compound. If you don't have those things, or you don't feel extremely comfortable disassembling and reassembling your firearm, I would say it's not worth it. It's not so much of a difference that you should go out and buy those things or put yourself in a position where you can't get your gun back together just to do this. And this is my first time taking this gun apart. Some of you might think that sounds crazy, but it was. It was my first time doing a full disassemble and reassemble. And so all in for 3 hours, 3.5 hours of my time, that's still significantly less than what it would have cost me to have somebody else do this work on my gun. And I also find it as a learning experience. Personally, I like to be very familiar with my firearms and knowing every intricate part about how they work. Should something happen, then I have a much better understanding of what it takes to fix it. So there you go, guys. I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoy your 365 as much as I'm enjoying it. I'm very, very happy, very pleased with this gun overall. It's going to take my Beretta's place as my carry gun. I just want to put some more rounds through it, and just become proficient with it. But there you go, guys. I hope that's helpful. Stay safe, and God bless.